The last customer had long gone, and the only sound in Tasty Diner was the squeak of Betty's rag as she wiped down the booths. She liked these quiet moments after closing, when the world felt still. But tonight, the silence was broken by a different sound, a muffled, frantic banging coming from the back. Her first thought was the old pipes, but then she heard it, a small, terrified voice, crying for help. Her heart jumped into her throat. She dropped the rag and ran towards the noise, her sneakers slipping on the greasy tile. The sound was coming from the giant walk-in freezer. She yanked on the heavy handle, but it didn't budge. It was locked from the outside. The large metal pin slid securely into place. "Hello? Is someone in there?" she called out, her voice shaking. "Help me, please. It's so cold," a young boy's voice wailed from the other side of the thick door. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Betty. It was Avrin, the sweet little boy who had been in for dinner with his babysitter hours ago. The babysitter must have left, thinking the boy had gone to the bathroom, and Avrin must have wandered in and gotten locked. Betty pulled on the handle with all her might, throwing her whole weight against the steel door. It was useless. She was too small, too weak. "Avrin, it's Betty, the waitress. I'm here. I'm going to get you out," she promised, her mind racing. She looked around for a tool, a key, anything. There was nothing. The banging from inside was getting more desperate, and his cries were turning into shivering sobs. Time was running out. Her eyes scanned the floor, praying for an idea, and that's when she saw it. A little paper napkin, half-trodden and greasy, was lying near the freezer door. She snatched it up. On it, in a child's messy scribble, was a phone number. Above it said, "Papa." Her hands trembled so badly she could barely punch the numbers into her phone. It rang once, twice. Then click. A voice, deep and rough as gravel, answered. It wasn't a greeting. It was a single, dangerous word. "Speak." For a second, Betty forgot how to form words. Hello? Is this Avrin's father? The silence on the other end was heavier than any sound. "Who is this?" the voice demanded, each syllable dripping with icy authority. "My name is Betty. I'm a waitress at Tasty Diner. Your son, Avrin, he's locked in the freezer. I can't get him out. He's screaming for help." The words tumbled out in a terrified rush. There was no gasp, no cry of panic. Just a deadly calm that was somehow more frightening. "The address. Now." She stammered out the restaurant's location. "Don't move. Don't call anyone else." The line went dead. Betty stood frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. The voice on the other end hadn't sounded worried. It had sounded like a command from a king. She rushed back to the freezer door, pressing her ear against the cold metal. "Avrin, your papa's coming. He's on his way," she said, trying to sound brave. The sobs from inside quieted to whimpers. Less than 3 minutes later, the front door of the restaurant exploded inward. Not opened, splintered off its hinges. A giant of a man filled the doorway, his broad shoulders blocking the streetlights outside. He was handsome in a sharp, terrifying way, like a statue carved from marble and shadow. But his eyes, a stormy gray, swept the room and landed on her, and they were the coldest things she had ever seen. 2 other people moved with him like shadows. A serious-faced woman with dark hair named Angeline, who immediately began checking the room, and a hulking man named Frank, who looked like he could break the freezer door with his bare hands. The giant, Nicholas Salvatore, strode toward her. He didn't ask questions. "Where?" Betty just pointed a shaking finger toward the back. He was past her in an instant. Frank didn't bother with the lock. He took a small, heavy tool from his pocket, wedged it into the doorframe, and with a grunt and a screech of tearing metal, he ripped the entire mechanism loose. The door swung open. A small, shivering form tumbled out into the light. "Avrin." Nicholas dropped to one knee, catching his son in a powerful embrace. For a single, fleeting moment, as he held the boy, the ice in his eyes melted, revealing a raw, desperate love that took Betty's breath away. But as Avrin's shivers subsided, Nicholas's gaze lifted and locked onto Betty. The warmth vanished, replaced by a sharp, calculating suspicion. He stood up, Avrin now clinging to his neck. You, he said, his voice low. You found him. You called. Betty could only nod, wrapping her arms around herself. He looked her up and down, from her simple waitress uniform to her frightened eyes. A boy gets locked in. A waitress just happens to find my private number. A number very few people have. He took a step closer, and Betty felt an instinctual urge to step back. This seems like a very convenient story. Her eyes widened. You think I? I would never. He was crying, he was so scared. Or it was a very good performance to get my attention, he interrupted, his voice silken and dangerous. To get close to me. Tears of frustration welled in Betty's eyes. How could he think that? How could anyone be so cruel? He watched her cry, his expression unreadable. Then he seemed to come to a decision. Avron needs a new nanny. The last one was unreliable. You will take the job. It wasn't a question. It was an order. Betty stared at him, stunned. Go home with this man? This terrifying man who thought she was a criminal? I have my job here, she whispered. You don't anymore, Nicholas stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. You will live in my home. You will care for my son. And I will be watching your every move. Betty thought of her tiny, lonely apartment, her mountain of bills, the struggle of every single day. This was insane. It was terrifying. But the money, the security, and little Avron, who was now looking at her with wide, trusting eyes over his father's shoulder. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. It felt like she was stepping off a cliff. She took a shaky breath and gave a single, nervous nod. Okay. A flicker of something, satisfaction, crossed Nicholas's face. Without another word, he turned, his long coat sweeping behind him, and walked out of the broken restaurant, his son in his arms. Angeline gestured for Betty to follow. As she stepped out into the cool night air, leaving her old life behind in the shattered doorway, she had no idea that her real story was just beginning. 4 weeks, Betty lived within its high walls of Salvatore's mansion, following a strict routine of caring for Avron under the watchful eyes of the guards and the cold, distant gaze of Nicholas. He was a ghost in his own home, appearing for brief meals where he spoke little, his stormy eyes often lingering on her with a mix of suspicion and something else she couldn't name. Avron was her only joy. The little boy clung to her, his laughter echoing through the grand, silent halls. It was during one of these laughter-filled afternoons, playing in the sprawling backyard, that the world exploded. It started with the crunch of metal and the shatter of glass. A black van had rammed the back of the town car as they were returning from the park. Before Betty could even scream, men with masks poured out, their guns looking alien and terrifying in the bright sunlight. Get down! Nicholas's voice was not a shout, but a low, powerful command that cut through the chaos. In one fluid motion, he shoved Betty and Avron to the floor of the car, his own body shielding them. The air filled with loud, popping sounds. Frank, in the front seat, was already firing back, his face a mask of cold focus. Betty squeezed her eyes shut, clutching a sobbing Avron. She heard grunts, the thud of bodies, and Nicholas's sharp, efficient movements. He wasn't just giving orders, he was in the fight, a predator unleashed. When she dared to peek, she saw him disarm a man with a brutal, precise twist of his wrist, the crack of bones sickeningly clear. He moved with a terrifying grace she had never seen, a side of him that was all danger and deadly skill. It was over in minutes. The attackers lay subdued or fled. Silence returned, heavy and thick with the smell of gun smoke and fear. That night, tucked safely in the mansion, the brave front Betty had put on for Avron crumbled. Alone in her lavish room, she sank to the floor, trembling. The images replayed behind her eyes, the guns, the violence, Nicholas's fierce protection. Sobs racked her body, the terror of the day finally consuming her. She didn't hear her door open. A shadow fell over her. Betty! She looked up, tears streaming down her face, to find Nicholas standing there. The cold, untouchable boss was gone. His jacket was off, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and his expression was unreadable. He didn't say a word. He simply knelt and gathered her into his arms. It was not a gentle hug. It was a claiming. His arms were strong, solid, wrapping around her shaking form and pulling her against the hard wall of his chest. The feeling was electric, a jolt of pure, warm safety that silenced her tears. She could feel the steady, powerful beat of his heart against her cheek, a rhythm that steadied her own. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He just held her, his chin resting on the top of her head. Betty melted into the embrace, her hands fisting in his shirt. All the suspicion, all the distance, evaporated in that single, charged moment. She tilted her head back to look at him, her eyes searching his. His gaze dropped to her lips. Then he was kissing her. It wasn't a gentle, questioning kiss. It was passionate, desperate, and full of a hunger they had both been denying. It was a silent confession in the dark, a promise and a question all at once. For that endless moment, he wasn't a mafia boss and she wasn't a waitress. They were just a man and a woman, forgetting everything but the feel of each other. After that night, a new, secret world opened within the mansion. When Avron was asleep and the guards were at their posts, Nicholas would find her. Their secret romance bloomed in whispered conversations in the library, in stolen, spicy moments in shadowy corridors where his hands would learn the curves of her body and her lips would trace the line of his jaw. He began to talk to her, really talk. He told her about the weight of his legacy, the loneliness of his power. This life, it's a cage I was born into, he confessed one night, his voice a low rumble in the dark. I never knew there could be softness in it. Until you. He showed her a heart that wasn't just tough, but tender for her alone. He made her feel not just safe, but cherished in a way she had never dreamed possible. But the outside world was never far. Angeline, ever watchful, pulled Betty aside one day. He cares for you, she said, her voice low and serious. And that is the most dangerous thing that can happen to a man like him. This love, it makes him vulnerable. It makes you a target. Be careful, Betty. This fairy tale has monsters. Betty nodded, but the warning was a distant echo drowned out by the sound of her own heart. A week later, Nicholas blindfolded her. Trust me, was all he said. He led her into a car, and when the cloth was removed, she gasped. They were on a private hilltop, the entire city glittering like a carpet of diamonds below them. A blanket was spread with food, and candles flickered in the gentle breeze. It was a world away from the danger and the high walls. Under a sky dusted with a million stars, Nicholas took her hands. You changed everything, Betty, he said, his voice thick with an emotion that made her heart soar. You and Avron, you are my real life. The only one that matters. He took a small, velvet box from his pocket. I am going to leave all of this behind. For us. For our family. He opened the box. Inside, a diamond ring sparkled, catching the starlight. Marry me. Let me spend forever making you feel as loved as you have made me. Tears of pure, untainted joy filled Betty's eyes. This was it. The happy ending. The dangerous past was behind them, and a beautiful future shone brighter than the city lights below. Yes, she breathed, her voice full of certainty. Yes, Nicholas. Forever. As he slid the ring onto her finger, she believed with all her heart that their story was just beginning, and it would be a perfect one. She had no idea the final, shocking page was already being written. Betty was in an elegant boutique that was a world of silk and satin, a far cry from Betty's old life. She floated between the racks, her engagement ring catching the light. For the first time, she was choosing a dress not as a nanny, but as the future Mrs. Salvatore. She held up a sleek, crimson gown, imagining Nicholas's eyes darkening with approval. It suits you, a soft, aged voice said behind her. Betty turned. An old man with kind eyes and a weathered face stood there. He had a gentle smile, but it didn't reach the sadness in his gaze. Thank you, Betty said, polite but cautious. You have her smile, the man continued, his voice nostalgic. Your mother, Clara. Betty's blood ran cold. You knew my parents? I was their accountant. Your father, Robert, was my best friend. The man's smile faded completely. He built his hardware business from nothing. He was so proud. Then the Salvatores came. The name landed like a physical blow. Betty's grip tightened on the dress hanger. A young Nicholas, eager to prove himself to his father, wanted the land our store was on, the man explained, his voice dropping. Robert refused to sell. So, Nicholas didn't just make an offer. He made an example. He had his men trash the storefront night after night. He threatened their suppliers. He spread vicious lies that ruined their reputation. Within 6 months, the bank foreclosed. The Salvatores bought the property for pennies. He pulled a folded, yellowed envelope from his inner pocket. Your parents never recovered. The shame, the debt, it consumed them. They died in a car accident a year later, but everyone who knew them knew it was a broken heart that truly killed them. With trembling hands, Betty took the envelope. Inside were faded photographs of her parents' thriving store, followed by grainy shots of the smashed windows. There were copies of official-looking documents, loan denials, the foreclosure notice. The final paper was a brief, local news article about the tragic, untimely death of Robert and Clara Miller. The world tilted. The luxurious boutique, the expensive dress, the ring on her finger, it all turned to ash. The man who held her at night, who promised her a future, was the same one who had systematically destroyed her past. The love she felt was built on the grave of her parents' dreams. Why are you telling me this now? Betty whispered, her voice hollow. Because you are about to marry the man who murdered them, just as surely as if he put a gun to their heads, the man said gently. I couldn't let you do it in ignorance. He left her there, standing amidst the finery, her future shattered. The diamond on her finger felt like a brand of betrayal. Somehow, she made it back to the mansion. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, the documents burning a hole in her purse. When Nicholas found her, she was staring out the window of her room. You're quiet, my love, he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. His touch, once her greatest comfort, now made her skin crawl. Wedding nerves. She forced her body to relax against his, a perfect, beautiful lie. She turned in his arms and looked up at him, manufacturing a tearful, overwhelmed smile. It's all so perfect. It's everything I've ever wanted. He kissed her forehead, completely fooled. It's only the beginning. The lie became her armor. She played her part flawlessly. She oohed and ahed at the wedding plans, smiled for the photographers, and accepted the congratulations of dangerous men and their elegant wives. She was the blushing, happy bride, and Nicholas, the powerful king, was utterly enchanted by his queen. He decided the public proposal wasn't enough. He wanted to claim her properly in front of the entire city. He planned a grand engagement gala at the city's most opulent hotel. The ballroom was a sea of the city's most powerful and dangerous people. Under the glittering cascade of 1,000 crystal lights, with everyone watching, Nicholas took her hand. I have already asked you in private, he said, his voice echoing in the sudden hush. But I want the world to know. Betty, you are my life. My future. My family. He didn't get down on one knee. He stood tall, a king proclaiming his choice to his kingdom. He looked at her, his stormy eyes full of a love that was now a poison to her. The crowd held its breath. Betty looked out at the sea of faces, rivals, allies, sharks who smelled blood in the water. She then looked back at Nicholas, the man who had orphaned her. She let a single perfect tear of joy slide down her cheek. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent room. My family. The crowd erupted in cheers. Nicholas pulled her into a triumphant kiss, and she kissed him back, pouring every ounce of her shattered heart and burning rage into the performance. It was the best acting of her life. The wedding day was a spectacle. The cathedral was packed. Every criminal kingpin, every corrupt official, every society matron was there to witness the unification of the Salvatore Empire with its new, innocent heart. Nicholas stood at the altar, impeccable in his tuxedo, a look of proud, possessive anticipation on his face. The organ music swelled. All heads turned to the back of the church. The doors remained closed. A minute passed. Then two. A nervous whisper began to ripple through the pews. Nicholas's smile tightened. Frank, standing as his best man, shifted uncomfortably. Then a side door opened. A young altar boy, looking confused, hurried down the aisle and handed a single, folded piece of paper to Frank. Frank's face went pale as he read it. He handed it to Nicholas. Nicholas unfolded the note. The words were written in a calm, precise hand he knew so well. "You took my family. Now I take your honor." The paper crumpled in his fist. The ice-cold rage that settled on his features was more terrifying than any shouted curse. He slowly lifted his head and scanned the crowd, his enemies smirking, his allies looking away in shame. He had been brought to his knees not by a bullet or a rival, but by the woman he loved. He had been left at the altar, humiliated in front of everyone who mattered, his power shown to be a hollow joke. He turned to Frank, his voice a low, deadly whisper that cut through the stunned silence. "Find her. I don't care how long it takes." At that exact moment, high above the clouds, Betty looked out the window of a plane. The city that housed her gilded cage, her beautiful nightmare, shrunk to a tiny speck of light below. She wasn't crying. Her face was a mask of calm resolve and her heart was a stone in her chest. She had destroyed the Mafia boss, but she had also destroyed the only man she had ever loved. And as the plane flew into the unknown, she knew that this love story was far from over. Her revenge was just starting, and she'd be back to ruin Nicholas piece by piece. If you enjoy this story, kindly show us some love by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments section. See you in the next video above. The clatter of plates and the low hum of after-work chatter were the usual sounds of Bellina, a simple diner where Kylie Costa worked. She was a quiet girl, her eyes often downcast, her thoughts always on the mountain of bills and her father's desperate pleas for more time from men who offered none. She moved between tables like a ghost, hoping to stay unnoticed. Tonight, that was impossible. The men at table 7 commanded the room's silent attention. They wore sharp suits and stern expressions, but the one in the center, Vincenzo Vestel, was different. He wasn't loud, but his presence was like a calm, deep lake, powerful and still. He was bored, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on the nervous waitress refilling his water glass. A slow, curious smile spread across his face. $5,000, he said, his voice cutting through the quiet. The room seemed to hold its breath. Kylie froze, her heart thudding against her ribs. $5,000, Vincenzo repeated, leaning forward. "If you can take my order in Russian." A few of his men chuckled softly. It was a cruel joke, a game for their amusement. Kylie's cheeks burned. She thought of the eviction notice, of her father's tired eyes. Desperation was a bitter taste in her mouth. She swallowed hard, her mind racing back to an old, fuzzy movie she'd watched with her father. She took a shaky breath, her voice a timid whisper as she stammered the only phrase she could remember. "Kto vy kotait? What would you like?" The laughter died instantly. Vincenzo's amused smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, undiluted shock. His men stared, their jaws slightly slack. The brave, broken Russian from this timid little waitress was the last thing any of them expected. Vincenzo leaned back, a new, deep respect in his eyes. Without another word, he pulled a thick stack of bills from his jacket and placed it on the table. "The order is for steak rare," he said, his voice now soft and serious. He then added several more $100 bills as a tip. As she took the money with trembling hands, he turned to the young, serious-faced man at his shoulder. "Tommy, make sure she gets home safe. No detours." Tommy, Greco, nodded sharply. "Yes, boss." The car ride was silent at first. Kylie sat in the back, clutching the life-changing money, staring out at the passing streetlights. Tommy watched her in the rearview mirror. He saw the way her shoulders were still hunched with fear, the gentle way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. He saw not a girl who had challenged his boss, but a fragile bird who had found a moment of incredible courage. A strange, protective feeling swelled in his chest. He, who faced danger every day, felt nervous to speak. "That was brave what you did back there," he finally said, his voice softer than usual. Kylie jumped slightly, meeting his eyes in the mirror for a second before looking down. "I was just lucky," she whispered. "No," Tommy said, his gaze lingering on her reflection. "That wasn't luck." He wanted to say more, to tell her his name, to ask for hers, but the words stuck in his throat. He was just the bodyguard. He drove the rest of the way in a silence he now found frustrating, his mind replaying the sight of her brave, frightened eyes. Vincenzo couldn't get her out of his head. In his world of calculated threats and fake smiles, her genuine, desperate courage was a spark in the dark. A few days later, he found her leaving her small, run-down apartment building. "Kylie," he said, stepping out of his car. She flinched, ready to run. He raised his hands peacefully. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I have a job offer." He explained that his personal library, a vast room of books in his penthouse, was in a state of chaos. He needed someone organized and quiet to sort it. The pay he offered was more money than she or her father had seen in a year. Torn between fear and need, Kylie agreed. The next day, she stood in the center of the magnificent library, overwhelmed by the floor-to-ceiling shelves. She worked quietly, her small hands carefully sorting through leather-bound classics and modern thrillers. Vincenzo would sometimes watch her from the doorway, unseen. The frantic energy of his life seemed to calm in her presence. He started visiting the library himself, first just to ask if she needed anything, then to talk. He told her about the weight of always being in charge, the loneliness of a life where no one spoke their true mind. She, in turn, slowly began to share her fears, the shadow of debt, the constant anxiety that kept her awake at night. One afternoon, he found her tracing the gold lettering on a book of poetry. "My mother loved this one," she said softly, not realizing he was there. Vincenzo didn't reply. He simply picked up the book and began to read the poem aloud, his deep voice giving life to the words. Kylie looked up, and in that moment, the wall between the powerful boss and the timid waitress crumbled. A gentle, sweet connection began to bloom, built on shared quiet moments and understood loneliness. And Tommy watched it all. Stationed by the door during her shifts, he was a silent witness to their growing closeness. He saw the way Vincenzo's stern face softened when he spoke to her. He saw the faint, rare smiles that now touched Kylie's lips. A cold, sharp knot of jealousy tightened in his stomach. He was the one who had driven her home. He was the one who had seen her vulnerability first. He should be the one making her smile, not the boss. He was just the shadow in the room, and the thought filled him with a bitter rage. After 2 weeks, Vincenzo asked her on a real date. Somewhere bright and loud and normal, he promised. He took her to a bustling jazz club, a world away from his dark dealings. He made her laugh with silly stories from his childhood, carefully editing out the violence. For a few hours, Kylie wasn't a waitress from a poor family, and Vincenzo wasn't a mafia boss. They were just a man and a woman, their hands brushing, then finally linking together under the table. From the driver's seat of a car parked across the street, Tommy watched. He saw the easy way they talked, the way Vincenzo leaned in to hear her, the way Kylie's face lit up with a joy he had never seen. But when he saw Vincenzo's hand gently take hers, something inside Tommy snapped. The sight was a physical pain. It wasn't right. The boss had everything: power, money, respect. And now he was taking the one good, pure thing Tommy had ever wanted for himself. He was supposed to be their protector, their silent guardian. But that night, driven by a jealous fire he could no longer control, he became the opposite. Using a cheap, untraceable phone, he sent a single, anonymous text to a number belonging to a small-time, ambitious rival crew led by a man named Enzo, the Viper, Marino. Castell's warehouse on 4th and Harbor. "Security is light tonight. Big shipment inside." He sent it, then threw the phone into the river, his heart pounding not with fear, but with a twisted sense of hope. The ensuing chaos would demand Vincenzo's full attention. It would pull him back into his dark world, away from Kylie. And in the confusion, Tommy thought, maybe she would finally see the man who was always, faithfully, in the background. Maybe she would finally see him. The phone call came in the dead of night, shattering the peace Vincenzo had just begun to cherish. He was in his study, smiling at a text from Kylie about a book she'd found, when the frantic voice of his warehouse manager filled his ear. "Boss, they hit us." It was Marino's crew. Vincenzo's smile vanished, replaced by the cold, hard mask of the man he used to be. The warehouse on 4th and Harbor was a key hub, and the attack was a bold, stupid move from a rival he considered a minor nuisance. He had to go. Immediately. He called Kylie, his voice tight with an apology he couldn't fully explain. "Something's come up. Business. I'm so sorry." On the other end, Kylie's heart sank. She heard the change in his voice, the return of the intimidating boss. "I understand," she whispered, but the dial tone was already humming in her ear. The warmth from their perfect date evaporated, leaving a cold dread in its place. The next morning, Tommy arrived at her apartment under the guise of a routine check-in. He found her curled on her sofa, looking small and lost, the hopeful glow from the night before completely gone. "He left so quickly," she said, her voice fragile. "He just changed back into someone else." Tommy sat opposite her, his face a mask of fake concern. "That's the life, Kylie," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "The business will always come first. It's a demanding mistress. It doesn't leave room for distractions." He let the word hang in the air, poisonous and sharp. "He lives in a world of emergencies. You'll always be waiting for a call that doesn't come." He leaned forward, positioning himself as the stable, understanding alternative. "I'm not like that. What you see is what you get. I'm just a man who cares." He looked at her with what he hoped were soulful eyes. But instead of nodding in agreement, Kylie's chin lifted. A spark of defiance lit her timid eyes. "He's carrying a world on his shoulders, Tommy. A world I can't even imagine. He didn't abandon me, he's protecting what's his. That includes me." Her loyalty to Vincenzo was an unbreakable shield. "I understand his responsibilities." Tommy's friendly expression froze, then hardened almost imperceptibly. Her defense of Vincenzo was like a slap. The jealousy that had been simmering inside him boiled over into a cold, desperate rage. Comforting her wasn't enough. Distracting Vincenzo wasn't enough. He needed to remove Vincenzo from the picture for good. Driven by a twisted love that had curdled into obsession, Tommy sought a permanent solution. He arranged a secret meeting with Enzo, the Viper, Marino, the very man whose crew had attacked the warehouse. They met in a grimy auto body shop, the air thick with the smell of grease and danger. "I have the route, the time, and the security details for Castell's cash shipment next Tuesday," Tommy stated, his voice cold and flat. "The biggest one of the year." Enzo, a wiry man with snake-like eyes, circled him. "And what does a loyal dog like you want in return for biting his master?" "Two things," Tommy said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "First, Vincenzo Castell must die in the ambush. No prisoners, no negotiations." "And the second?" Enzo pressed, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "The girl who is sometimes with him. Kylie. She is not to be harmed. You will bring her to me. She will be mine." Enzo let out a low, nasty chuckle. "So that's it. A puppy love coup. Fine. You give me Castell's empire, and I'll give you his leftover scraps. We have a deal." The plan was set. Tommy provided every detail, sealing Vincenzo's fate and orchestrating his own twisted fantasy of a future where he would be Kylie's grieving hero. A few days later, wanting to surprise Vincenzo after his stressful week, Kylie decided to bring lunch to his private office. She carried a basket of food through the penthouse, her footsteps silent on the plush carpets. As she approached the half-open door of his study, she heard Tommy's voice. She smiled, about to call out, until she heard the cold, hard tone he was using. "Yes, the truck will be most vulnerable on the bridge. My men will be redirected. Just make sure your people don't mess it up. Remember, Kylie comes to me unharmed." Kylie froze, her blood turning to ice. The basket nearly slipped from her numb fingers. She stumbled back, pressing herself against the wall, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure he could hear it. The quiet bodyguard, the man who had pretended to comfort her, was not just jealous. He was a monster, a traitor who had sold out the man she loved for a chance to own her. The villain wasn't some shadowy rival, he was the one who stood at Vincenzo's right hand. Terrified and trembling, Kylie knew she couldn't confront Tommy. He was a trained killer, and if he knew she'd overheard him, he would kill her and Vincenzo immediately. She had to warn Vincenzo without Tommy finding out. But how? Tommy was always nearby, watching. Then she remembered the library. One afternoon, while sorting a stack of spy novels, she and Vincenzo had laughed about the silly ways characters left secret messages. A book code would be easiest, Vincenzo had joked, pulling a thick, red leather-bound history book from the shelf. If you ever need to warn me about something, just leave this one on my desk. I'll know it means danger. It had been a game, a moment of playful silliness. Now it was her only hope. Her hands shaking, she walked into the library, trying to appear normal. She went straight to the history section, her eyes scanning the spines until she found the distinct red leather. She pulled it out, the weight of it feeling like the weight of their lives. With a deep breath, she walked calmly into Vincenzo's empty study and placed the book squarely in the center of his large, polished desk. It looked innocent, just a book left out. But to her, it screamed of betrayal. Minutes later, Vincenzo strode into his study, his mind already on the upcoming cash shipment. His eyes fell immediately on the red book sitting starkly on his clean desk. He stopped dead. The playful joke, a secret shared only with Kylie, flashed in his mind with terrifying clarity. Danger. His head snapped up, his gaze sweeping the room, his mind racing. The only danger close enough to warrant this warning was inside his own house. The leak about the warehouse, it hadn't been a lucky guess from Marino. It had been an inside job. The betrayal was from within his inner circle. He called his most trusted remaining men into the study, his voice dangerously calm. Tommy entered with the others, his face a mask of innocent alertness. Vincenzo picked up the red book, his eyes locking onto Tommy. "Someone in this room," he said, his voice low and icy, "has been talking to Enzo Marino. Someone has betrayed us." The room tensed. Accusations flew between the other men. But Tommy just stood there, a slow, strange smile spreading across his face as he looked from the book to Vincenzo's furious eyes. He understood. Kylie had figured it out. "No more lies," Vincenzo growled, stepping closer to him. "Was it you?" Tommy didn't deny it. He didn't try to run. Instead, he puffed out his chest, his eyes blazing with a mad pride. "It was me," he yelled, his voice echoing in the tense room. "I did it all for her. For Kylie. You have everything, and you took the one thing I wanted. You didn't deserve her. I loved her first. I deserved her." The confession hung in the air, not one of shame, but of twisted, jealous triumph. The villain had been hiding in plain sight all along, and his motive was a love that had festered into a deadly poison. The confession was a starting pistol. No sooner had Tommy's shouted words faded than the penthouse was breached. Enzo, the Viper, Marino and his crew, following the timeline Tommy had given them, stormed in, expecting a simple ambush. Instead, they walked into a war zone. Vincenzo's loyal men, now aware of the traitor in their midst, fought with furious loyalty. The study became a chaos of shouting men, crashing furniture, and the sickening thud of fists. Through the fray, Tommy's eyes were locked on one target, Kylie. He fought his way toward her, his face a mask of desperate obsession. "Kylie, come with me. I'll keep you safe," he yelled, reaching for her arm. But the timid waitress was gone. In her place was a woman forged in fire. As his hand closed around her wrist, Kylie didn't flinch. Her eyes darted to the heavy, brass bookend on the desk, the very one she had dusted just days before. With a cry that was part fear and part fury, she swung it with all her might. It connected with Tommy's shoulder with a solid crunch. He roared in pain and surprise, his grip loosening for just a second. It was all the opening Vincenzo needed. He moved like a storm, disarming the man in front of him and closing the distance to Tommy. Their fight was short and brutal, a clash of former brothers now turned mortal enemies. Vincenzo disarmed Tommy, pinning him to the ground as his men subdued the rest of Marino's crew. Breathing heavily, Vincenzo looked from the betrayed, hate-filled face of Tommy to the smirking, captured Enzo Marino. A dark, clever idea sparked in his eyes. He pulled Tommy to his feet and shoved him toward Marino. "Your deal was for you to kill me and give him the girl," Vincenzo said to Marino, his voice cold and clear. "He gave you a bad tip. He failed. He breached your contract." He looked at Tommy with a final, dismissive glare. "I'm not going to kill you. I'm giving you to the man you betrayed me for. Let him decide what a traitor is worth." The color drained from Tommy's face. Enzo Marino's smirk widened into a vicious, predatory grin. This was a fate far worse than a quick death. As Marino's men dragged a screaming, struggling Tommy away, Vincenzo knew the traitor would never be seen again. In the quiet aftermath, with the penthouse secured, the adrenaline faded and Kylie began to shake. Vincenzo found her in the library, hugging herself, staring at the spot where she had struck Tommy. "I was so scared," she whispered as he wrapped his arms around her. "I know, amore mio," he murmured into her hair. "But I was more scared of losing you," she said, pulling back to look at him, her eyes now clear and certain. "The danger was real, but a life without you would be empty. This life, your world, it's too dark. I love you, but I can't live in the shadows." Vincenzo cupped her face. "We won't. The decision was easy. This ends now. All of it." They began to pack, planning to leave the city and the life of crime behind forever. As Kylie was carefully wrapping a vase, she found a small, flat package tucked behind it in a closet. She unwrapped it. There, in a simple, elegant frame, was the very first $5,000 bill Vincenzo had ever given her. Taped to the back was a small note in his handwriting, "The day my luck changed." 1 year later, the salty breeze from the ocean drifted through the open doors of The Lucky Page, a cozy bookstore in a sun-drenched coastal town. Vincenzo, looking more relaxed than he ever had in a suit, was stacking new arrivals. Kylie, her face glowing with a confident, easy smile, was at the counter helping a customer. Her father, healthy and debt-free, lived in a small cottage just down the street. Their forever was peaceful, happy, and complete. A young, flustered couple entered, their voices tense. "I told you we can't afford it right now," the young man hissed. "It was just one book," the woman replied, her voice thick with disappointment. Vincenzo and Kylie shared a look across the shop, a silent, understanding conversation that passed between them in an instant. They saw their old selves in the couple's struggle. After the couple left, bickering softly, Vincenzo noticed a worn leather wallet on the floor. He picked it up and handed it to Kylie. Without a word, she opened it. Inside was a faded photo and a few crumpled bills. She looked at the framed $5,000 bill they kept behind the counter, the symbol of their own desperate beginning. She smiled, then carefully slipped the framed bill into the wallet. On a piece of their shop stationery, she wrote 4 words, "A lucky start. Pay it forward one day." She handed the wallet to Vincenzo, who slipped out the door and returned it to the grateful, shocked couple. They watched from the doorway as the couple opened it, their anger turning to stunned, joyful disbelief. Their story, which began with a risky bet in a dangerous world, had ended with a quiet gift in a place filled with light. The $5,000 had come full circle, and their love story was now a quiet legend, ready to begin again for someone else. And that, dear reader, is the story of how a lucky guess forged a forever. Did their ending bring you closure? Were you on the edge of your seat when Kylie fought back? We want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what your favorite moment was. Did you predict Tommy's betrayal, or were you completely shocked? Subscribe for more dramatic, twist-filled romance stories that will keep you guessing until the very last word. Your support helps us bring these tales to life. Thank you for watching. The crisp autumn air bit at Catherine Salvatore's cheeks as she hurried down the sidewalk, her worn teacher's bag slung over her shoulder. It had been a long day of spelling tests and glitter glue, and all she wanted was the warmth of her small apartment. She took a shortcut through the narrow alley between Mr. Gable's bakery and the old laundromat, a path she'd walked 100 times. That's when she heard it. Not the usual city sounds, but a sharp, frightened whisper. "Please, I have nothing for you." Catherine froze. Deeper in the alley, shadowed by an overflowing dumpster, two large men in dark jackets had cornered an elderly woman. The woman, clutching her pearl-handled handbag like a shield, looked tiny and terrified. "The bag, lady. And the necklace." "Don't make this difficult," one of the men grunted, his voice like grinding stones. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. Every sensible thought screamed at her to run, to call for help, to be invisible. But then she saw the woman's eyes, wide with a pure, animal fear. They were the same eyes of a little boy in her class when a bigger kid stole his lunch money. And in that moment, Catherine Lombardi, the poor teacher, stopped being just a bystander. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She planted her feet, took a deep breath, and unleashed her most powerful weapon, her teaching voice. "Excuse me." The sound, sharp and authoritative, cracked through the alley like a whip. Both men flinched, spinning around in surprise. They saw a young woman in a simple coat, her brown hair escaping its messy bun, looking more like an angry librarian than a threat. "What do you two think you are doing?" she demanded, striding forward as if she owned the alley. She pointed a finger at them. "Harassing a senior citizen? That is completely unacceptable behavior. You should be ashamed of yourselves." The men were so stunned they took a step back. This wasn't in their script. The old woman seized the moment. With a surprising burst of speed, she darted past her stunned attackers and clutched Catherine's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Let's go, dear," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. Catherine didn't need telling twice. She kept her fierce gaze on the two men, walking backwards slowly at first, then pulling the woman with her as she turned and broke into a run. They didn't stop until they burst out onto the main street, the bright lights and normal sounds of the city feeling like a different world. The woman, whose name was Rosa, was shaking. "My dear, you were so brave," she panted, her hand on her chest. "Let's get you somewhere warm," Catherine said, her own adrenaline starting to fade. She led Rosa to a small, brightly lit cafe called The Daily Grind and guided her to a booth. She ordered 2 peppermint teas, the universal drink for calming nerves. As Rosa sipped her tea, the color returned to her cheeks. She was an elegant woman, with kind eyes and beautifully styled silver hair. She looked utterly out of place in a dusty alley. "They wanted my locket," she murmured, touching the simple gold pendant at her throat. "It has a picture of my son inside. It's worthless to anyone but me." "They were just bullies," Catherine said firmly, the teacher in her taking over. "And bullies fold when you stand up to them." Rosa gave her a long, thoughtful look. "You have a very strong spirit, my dear. What is your name?" "Catherine. Catherine Salvatore." "Well, Catherine," Rosa said, placing a soft, wrinkled hand over hers. "My son is a very grateful man. He will want to thank you properly." Catherine just smiled, brushing it off. "That's really not necessary. I'm just glad you're okay." She had no idea that Rosa's grateful son was Carmine Moretti, the man the newspapers called the Wolf, the most dangerous man in the city. Across town, in an office that looked more like a rich man's library, Carmine Moretti was reading a business report when his phone buzzed. It was his mother's bodyguard, Marco, his voice tight with panic. "Boss, there was an incident. With your mother." Carmine was on his feet in an instant, his entire body going rigid. The air in the room turned to ice. "What kind of incident?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. When Marco explained the failed mugging and the unknown woman who had intervened, a cold, black fury settled over Carmine. Someone had dared to touch his mother. The thought was a poison in his veins. He gave a series of short, sharp orders. "Find out who they were. I want their names. And find the girl." It took his network less than an hour. Catherine Lombardi, 26 years old. 3rd grade teacher at PS 112. Lives in a walk-up apartment on Oak Street. Clean record. That evening, Carmine stood outside Catherine's simple blue door. He felt like a giant in the narrow, faintly smelling of cabbage hallway. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket, a strange nervousness fluttering in his gut. This was a debt of honor, not a business meeting. He knocked. When Catherine opened the door, her eyes widened. The man standing there was enormous, blocking out the hall light. He wasn't just tall, he was broad, a mountain of a man packed into an impossibly expensive-looking charcoal gray suit. His face was all hard lines and sharp angles, with a strong jaw and dark, intense eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice small. "Catherine Lombardi?" His voice was a deep rumble. She could only nod, her hand tightening on the doorknob. "My name is Carmine Moretti. You helped my mother, Rosa, today." He saw the instant recognition in her eyes, followed quickly by a healthy dose of fear. He kept his hands visible, his posture relaxed. "She told me what you did. You were very brave." "I just did what anyone would do," Catherine stammered. A faint, almost invisible smile touched Carmine's lips. "No, they wouldn't." He looked past her, into her small, cozy living room filled with books and student artwork. It was a world away from his own. "She means everything to me. You saved her, and for that, I owe you a debt. A very large one." Catherine just stared. This wasn't a grateful son bringing a thank you card. This was something else entirely. The way he said debt made it sound like a life sentence. He was terrifying, but there was a raw honesty in his eyes that kept her from slamming the door. "I don't want a debt," she said, finding a sliver of her earlier courage. "I'm just glad she's safe." Carmine studied her, the defiant set of her chin, the genuine confusion in her eyes. She wasn't playing a game. She truly didn't understand the world she had just stepped into. "That may be," he said softly, "but the debt is owed nonetheless. Be careful, Miss Lombardi." With a final, lingering look, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing heavily in the hall. Catherine closed the door slowly, leaning against it, her heart pounding for the second time that day. She had no idea that her act of kindness had just put a target on her back. Carmine's warning came too late. His rivals, the Volpe family, had indeed heard about the teacher who saved Rosa Moretti. They saw her not as a hero, but as a potential weakness for the wolf. A way to get to him. 2 nights later, Catherine came home to a nightmare. Her apartment door was splintered, hanging crookedly on its hinges. Her heart leaped into her throat. Inside, her home was destroyed. Cushions were slashed, books torn from shelves, her few nice plates smashed on the floor. It wasn't a robbery, her cheap television was still there. It was a message. A violent, terrifying warning. Trembling, she fumbled for her phone. She had only one number to call, scribbled on a business card he had subtly left on her kitchen counter. "Moretti Holdings." He answered on the first ring. "Yes. It's Catherine," she choked out. "My apartment, they broke in. Are you hurt?" His voice was instantly sharp, all business. "No. I'm just scared. Stay where you are. Do not go inside. I'm 2 minutes away." He was there in 90 seconds, arriving in a silent black car with Marco. He took one look at the destruction and his face became a cold, hard mask. He walked over to where she stood shivering on the sidewalk, wrapped her in his own heavy wool coat, its warmth and scent of sandalwood enveloping her. "This is my fault," he said, his voice thick with guilt and anger. "You're not safe here anymore. You're coming with me." This time, Catherine didn't argue. The fear was too real. He took her to a house, not a hideout. It was a beautiful, modern home tucked away in the woods, surrounded by a high fence. It was warm, clean, and safe. That first night, Carmine, the man everyone feared, made her a simple bowl of pasta. He was surprisingly gentle, his large hands careful as he set the table. "They call you the wolf," she said quietly, watching him. He didn't look up from pouring her a glass of water. "Do I seem like a wolf to you?" "No," she admitted. "Not right now." As the days passed, a strange routine began. He would leave during the day but was always back for dinner. They talked. She told him about her students, her dreams of being a better teacher. He listened, truly listened, in a way no one ever had. He told her funny stories about his mother, about growing up in a big, loud Italian family. She saw the lonely man buried beneath the tough exterior, a man who carried a heavy weight. And Carmine, in turn, was amazed by her goodness, her simple, unwavering belief in people. She was a light in his dark world, and for the first time, he didn't want to extinguish it. He wanted to protect it no matter the cost. The safe house was a world of quiet luxury, a stark contrast to Catherine's shattered apartment. For 3 days, they existed in a strange, peaceful bubble. Carmine was a surprisingly considerate roommate. He always made coffee in the morning, left the newspaper folded for her, and was never anything but respectful. But the tension was always there, a silent hum in the air, the danger outside, and the growing pull between them inside. It broke on the 4th night with a crack of thunder that shook the windows. A violent storm had rolled in, and the power flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. Catherine, who had been reading on the sofa, gasped. A moment later, a warm, golden light filled the room. Carmine stood in the doorway, holding a heavy silver candelabra. The flickering flames danced across the sharp planes of his face, making him look both ancient and incredibly gentle. "The generator will kick on soon," his voice rumbled, softer than the thunder. He set the candles on the coffee table. "Are you all right?" "I'm not scared of the dark," she said, though her voice wavered. "I know," he said. He didn't leave. He sat in the armchair opposite her, the shadows hugging his large frame. "But you are scared of me." It wasn't a question. Catherine wrapped her arms around herself. "Not of you. Not anymore. Sort of whatever this is. This is me, trying to keep a good person from being destroyed because of my world," he said, his eyes holding hers in the candlelight. "Is that all it is?" The question slipped out, brave and foolish. The house groaned in the wind. Carmine didn't answer with words. He stood up, a massive silhouette against the storm, and crossed the room. He sat beside her on the sofa, the leather sighing under his weight. He was so close she could feel the heat from his body. "No," he whispered, his voice rough. "That is not all it is." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, a spark that jumped in the dark. Catherine's breath hitched. She saw the war in his eyes, the fierce control versus the raw want. "This is a bad idea," she breathed even as she leaned into his touch. "The worst," he agreed, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was a dam breaking. It was weeks of pent-up tension, of fear, of fascination, exploding into one desperate, searing connection. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her onto his lap as if she weighed nothing, crushing her against the solid wall of his chest. Her hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one they were creating. It was a kiss that tasted of danger and salvation, and it promised everything. The next morning, the power was back. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. They didn't speak of the kiss over breakfast, but everything had changed. The air was charged. His hand would brush hers when he passed the sugar, and a flush would creep up her neck. The way he looked at her was no longer guarded. It was possessive, awed. A week later he surprised her. "I want to see it," he said. "See what?" "Your world. The classroom." And so, Carmine Moretti, the wolf, found himself sitting in a tiny blue plastic chair, surrounded by 20 fascinated 8-year-olds. Catherine's students, who knew him only as Mr. Carmine, Ellie's friend, were captivated. He read them a story about a lonely giant, his deep, rumbling voice bringing the characters to life. He helped a little boy named Tommy fix a wobbly Lego tower, his large, usually dangerous hands surprisingly deft with the small bricks. Catherine watched him, her heart feeling too big for her chest. He was a natural. He was kind. In this world he wasn't a monster, he was a hero. As the children ran out for recess, she walked over to him. "You were wonderful," she said, her voice soft. He looked around the room at the colorful artwork and the tiny desks. This is real," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "This goodness. You make me believe it exists." He leaned down and kissed her, right there in the middle of the classroom. It was a soft, claiming kiss, full of a promise that terrified and thrilled her. The happiness was a flame, and it drew the moths. That night, as they walked from the car to the safe house, the world erupted. A dark van screeched to a halt, its doors flying open. Men with guns poured out. "Get inside!" Carmine roared, shoving Catherine behind him. What happened next was a brutal, silent ballet of violence. Carmine moved like the animal they named him for. He was fast, efficient, and utterly ruthless. He disarmed one man with a sickening crack of an arm, used another as a human shield against a hail of bullets. Catherine watched, frozen in the doorway, as the man who read stories to children became a force of nature, protecting what was his. It was over in less than a minute. The men were down, groaning on the pavement. Carmine stood panting in the middle of the carnage, his knuckles bleeding, his suit jacket torn. He turned, his eyes wild, searching for her. When he saw she was safe, the fury drained from his face, replaced by a stark, raw fear. He strode to her, his hands cupping her face, checking for any hurt. "Catherine," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Dio mio, Catherine." He didn't wait for an answer. He crushed her to him, his body trembling against hers. Right there, surrounded by the evidence of his world, he held her as if she were the only thing keeping him from drowning. Later, in the quiet of the bedroom, they didn't speak. The adrenaline had morphed into a different, more urgent energy. His touches were no longer questioning but sure, a desperate mapping of her skin. Her responses were just as fierce, a silent affirmation that she was not afraid. This was not the storm-fueled passion of their first kiss. This was deeper. It was a grown-up, spicy fusion of gentle reverence and fierce claiming, a physical promise made in the shadow of violence. It was two people from different worlds, choosing each other in the most intimate way possible, whispering secrets with their bodies that they were still too scared to say out loud. As they lay tangled together in the dark, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, he finally spoke. "I can't lose you," he whispered into her hair. It was the closest either of them had come to saying, "I love you." And in the warm, safe darkness, Catherine believed it could be enough. The attack changed everything. It stripped away the last pretense of a temporary arrangement. Catherine was his, and he was hers. It was a fact as solid as the ground beneath their feet. Carmine became a man possessed by a single goal, which is to eliminate the Volpe family threat for good, to build a safe, clean future where he could love his teacher in the open. He laid his plan out for her one evening, tracing lines on a map. "It ends tomorrow, Catherine. Angelo Volpe thinks he can take everything from me. But he's wrong. This deal he thinks he's making, it's a trap. Once he's gone, the war is over. We can be free." Catherine listened, her stomach a knot of fear. She saw the cold fire in his eyes, the wolf ready for the hunt. "Just come back to me," she whispered, her hand covering his. "That's the only deal I care about." He kissed her, a long, lingering promise. "Wait for me. I'll be back before dark." The warehouse by the docks was silent, smelling of salt and rust. Carmine and his most trusted men moved like ghosts in the dim light. The trap was set. Angelo Volpe, a weasel of a man with cruel eyes, walked right into it, surrounded by his own soldiers. "It's over, Angelo," Carmine's voice echoed in the vast space. "You lost the moment you sent men after what was mine." Angelo Volpe didn't look scared. A slow, nasty smile spread across his face. He actually laughed, the sound bouncing off the corrugated steel walls. "You stupid animal. You think this is about me? You think I was dumb enough to target your precious mother?" Carmine went still, a cold trickle of dread running down his spine. "What are you talking about?" "I was trying to stop it, you fool." Angelo spat. "I heard a whisper, a crazy one. I didn't believe it. I thought if I scared the old lady, she'd run to you, and you'd see the snake in your own garden. But then that teacher got in the way." "What snake?" Carmine growled, his gun feeling suddenly heavy in his hand. "The one who raised you." Angelo shouted. "The one who ordered the hit on her own self to make you declare war on me. She wanted you to wipe me out. She thought that soft little teacher would make you weak, easier for her to control. It was all her. Rosa Moretti. The world tilted. Carmine's breath left his lungs. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. But Angelo was already pulling out a phone, playing a distorted audio clip. A woman's voice, elegant and cold, unmistakably his mother's. The Salvatore girl is a complication, but she makes him sentimental. A sentimental son is a manageable son. Ensure the Volpe problem is erased. Permanently. The ground fell out from under him. The entire war, Catherine's terror, the violence, it was all a game orchestrated by the one person he trusted absolutely. His own mother had used the woman he loved as a pawn. He found his mother in her sun-drenched conservatory, tending to her orchids as if it were any other day. When he entered, his face a mask of shattered stone, she simply smiled. "Carmine, darling. Is it done?" "Why?" The word was ripped from him, raw and broken. Rosa's smile didn't falter. She set down her watering can. "But, for this family. You were getting distracted. That girl was making you forget who you are. A Moretti is a king, not a schoolteacher's husband. I created a problem so you could be the solution. So you would remember your strength. You hurt her. You terrified her. You put her in the crossfire of a war you started," he roared, the vase of orchids shattering against the wall. "She is collateral damage." Rosa snapped, her composure finally cracking. "I did what was necessary to secure our legacy. Power is the only thing that lasts, karma, not love. I did it all for you." The truth was a physical blow. He looked at the woman who had sung him lullabies and saw a ruthless, power-hungry stranger. There was no love here, only a cold, calculated obsession with control. "You have no idea what love is," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And you will never see me again." He turned his back on her, on the empire she had built on lies, and walked away. Catherine was pacing in the safe house, the clock ticking past dark. When the door finally opened, she rushed forward, but stopped short. Carmine looked hollow. Defeated. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a pain deeper than any wound. "It's over," he said, his voice empty. He told her everything. The trap, Angelo's revelation, the recording, his mother's confession. He watched her face, waiting for the horror, for her to finally see the monster he came from and run. Catherine listened, her hand over her mouth. But as he finished, her expression wasn't one of fear or disgust. It was one of fierce, heartbreaking compassion. She walked to him and took his face in her hands. "She lost the most precious thing a mother can have," Catherine whispered, her thumbs wiping away the single tear he couldn't hold back. "She lost her son's heart. And I am so sorry she did that to you." In that moment, any last wall around Carmine's soul crumbled to dust. He collapsed into her arms, burying his face in her hair, and finally let the pain out. She held him, this strong, broken man, and promised him without words that he was still worthy of love. They used the evidence, the recording, to ensure Rosa Moretti was taken into custody for conspiracy and racketeering, her power stripped away forever. There was no dramatic shootout, just the cold, clean cut of the law. A month later, they stood on a windy train platform, a pair of simple suitcases at their feet. They were leaving the city, its shadows and its ghosts, behind. "Where will we go?" Catherine asked, lacing her fingers through his. "Anywhere," Carmine said, looking at her, his eyes clear for the first time. "As long as it's with you." He kissed her, a soft, forever kind of kiss, full of a future they would build together, not one built for them on a foundation of lies. They boarded the train, two wounded people who had found a real and fierce love in the middle of a war, and now, they were finally free. My lovely gems, where in the world are you reading this story? Kindly subscribe to our channel and let me know in the comments which part of Carmine and Catherine's journey had your heart racing the most. And if you loved their forbidden romance, don't forget to rate this story from 1 to 10 right here. Your thoughts mean the world to us.